Picture this. It is the year 1984, and you go home with this sick box art of this knockoff Conan fighting whatever this thing is. You can't wait to boot the game up. Dragon Slayer, it says on the box art. You put it in your disk drive, start the game, and are immediately hit with this. A real-time action RPG. Things are about to get real. And then you actually start playing and it looks like this. The game was apparently a huge deal when it came out due to being one of the first of its kind. Up there with Hive Light as setting precedent that these types of games can be fun to play, and in Dragon Slayer's case, was significantly better off. Dragon Slayer had its fair share of sequels, but most importantly it spawned the Legend of Heroes franchise, and by extension, the Trails franchise, which is still ongoing and very highly rated. However, I am saddened to report that I do not think Dragon Slayer stands the test of time nearly as well as some of its brethren that share similar gameplay. I will be playing 3 different versions of the game for this video, but notably I want to make a distinction. In the PC-88 version of the game, the one that I'm starting with, we have 2 different versions available. You see, when the game was first released, I'm presuming that some things weren't working as intended. Now, I can't be bothered to play through this twice. I mean, I was barely able to play through it once. But even by testing it out, the beginning of the original version shows a major difference. Enemies can walk over crosses in the original version, meaning that you'll be set up on by enemies from the moment you boot up the game. You don't even have time to pick up the bracelet to start pushing blocks. Skeletons will just rush you, and unfortunately there isn't much that we can do about it. Given that most of the future ports and remakes are based off the 2.0 re-release, with the most notable change being to its controls and enemies not able to cross crosses, I'm going to assume that crosses were supposed to work that way and they just simply didn't in the original release for whatever reason. But alright, enough talking, let's get to it. First thing we see is the control screen, with a fairly interesting setup with some commands that genuinely shocked me the first time opening it, especially the jump command. I thought it would be like an actual jump button, like we would have to do some platforming, and luckily that's not the case. The title screen itself is also very pretty and gasses the game up so much that as much as I disliked the experience, I'm glad that there were people who enjoyed it and apparently thought it was worthy of having this type of screen. We start the game here, next to our house, and our objective is to kill the dragon. Pretty self-explanatory. Dragon Slayer sets out to kill dragons. However, we don't have a weapon, so that's going to be kind of difficult. While we technically can fight monsters without a sword, we will deal very little damage, so I don't recommend attempting it. As with any old school RPG, your quest should begin with you getting some gear and then grinding for EXP. Head south and you can find a bracelet, some chests, and some coins. Now, you can only carry 1 item at a time, but the coins stack, so just collect all the coins first and then grab the bracelet and head a little bit further south where you can see this cross positioned between a hole in the wall, keeping the enemies out. You could head that way if you want to fight, but like I said, it's probably best to get a weapon, so let's head back north and we can find ourselves a sword. The bracelet allows you to push objects, but mainly blocks. You can also push your house, but we'll get to the purpose of that later. Take the path to the northwest and push the blocks out of the way carefully so that you still have room to traverse and you can find some magic potions along the way. Magic in this game costs 1 of these containers to cast, so it's a fixed resource, although in my personal opinion they give you far more than enough potions to make use of. Keep pushing the blocks and picking up whatever coins and vials you pass until eventually you can clear a path to your sword, which upon picking up, we can return home to actually rest at home. You'll need to unequip the bracelet, as otherwise you'll just push the house around, but by touching your house we can tally whatever coins you've collected and add them to your health. This isn't a permanent health increase or anything like that, it's just temporary. But in these early grinding stages, you might want that extra health, as our damage and experience is very low. You may have also noticed these little ghosts flying around. This is when they really start to become an issue. The ghosts like to pick up items off the floor, or even from your hands if you're unlucky, and then they just fly off with it to who knows where. Sometimes they'll drop something off right in front of you, sometimes they'll drop something super far away, sometimes they'll carry something and then immediately drop it off and have another ghost pick it up and carry it somewhere else, keeping you confused. For now, just try to keep a tight grip on the bracelet and head south, past the cross, and begin fighting some enemies. Every enemy has a very unique design, making them easy to recognize, but for now, let's start with the skeletons as they are the weakest. The game has push combat, similar to some other games from its time, most notably the Ys series. To attack an enemy, all you have to do is walk into it. Just be known that this also lets the enemy attack you. Now that we're getting into combat, let me describe what this menu on the side of the screen means, starting with the monster display. Upon attacking the enemy, the screen will change to display an image of the enemy, its health, its strength, and its experience. Experience functions like defense, so the higher your strength is to its defense, the more damage it takes per attack, and the same principle applies to you. If your experience is higher than the enemy's strength, you'll barely take damage. However, if the enemy's strength is higher than your experience, you'll take more damage. Using the skeleton here as an example, we can see that I have 200 experience and the skeleton has 300 attack, so I will take 100 damage per hit. And conversely, the skeleton has 150 experience while I have 1500 attack, meaning that if I had my sword when this screenshot was, I would have dealt 1350 damage per hit, and able to kill the skeleton in 2 turns. This little guy under the screen determines when the enemy's next move. If you move, everything on screen moves with you, and if you stand still, they'll start running to the side of the screen, and upon hitting it, everything else will move. So even when you're not moving, you have only a second or two to decide what to do. At the moment, we don't have much experience, which is why I wanted us to collect those coins at the start. The increased health will allow us to take more hits, so we don't need to return home to rest after every battle. Now, experience works about the same way that you would expect it to. But what about health, strength, and magic? Well, your health just goes up as you gain experience. Nothing special there. And then the magic, as listed previously, increases when you collect one of these potions, and it will decrease every time you cast a spell. Strength, however, is the worst one. Your strength only increases every time you collect one of these little plus signs. But it's not enough to simply pick it up. You need to actually carry it to your house and then drop it in order to add it to your stats. This is one of the biggest issues that the game has. Enemies will continuously spawn, and every time you kill a weaker enemy, it gets replaced by a stronger enemy. Now, using what we know about the combat, this means that we need to constantly be gathering these little crosses as well. But it's hard to do that when you're being constantly gunned down by every monster in town. So to do this, there are 2 big things we need to keep in mind. Keys to open chests, and our spells. Keys have infinite uses, but as stated, ghosts like to steal items, meaning that they may steal the key right out in front of you. Or you could open a chest and then they steal the item from right in front of you. And since we can only carry one item at a time, if you find a strength power-up, you'll need to drop the key and then walk back to your house, which is where the ability to push your house comes in handy. You know, you can just push it closer to wherever you are. The crosses may also come in here. While holding a cross, you are invulnerable, but you also cannot damage enemies. Most importantly, as stated previously, enemies cannot go over crosses, meaning that we can push the house somewhere and then wall it off with a bunch of crosses, keeping ourselves safe and creating a new hub area. However, this does still have the issue of a ghost possibly running by and stealing an item while you are off screen. It's not as simple as just collecting these items, sadly. With how maze-like the areas are and with how many enemies spawn per second, just walking around killing everything you see and pushing your house every so often won't get you very far. In fact, doing this, you'll likely end up killing so many weaker enemies that your experience rises to the point that you'll barely take damage and have a bunch of health, but yet lack the strength to damage the stronger enemies. So we'll require something more than just our sword. In this case, our magic. You probably saw the controls at the beginning of the game, but while on the field, just hit enter to pause the screen and bring up a command menu. Yeah, this game has a real-time pause feature. Final Fantasy VII Remake ripped off Dragon Slayer. Square Enix has done it again. Jump is the first spell that we will learn, and it just teleports you to a random spot on the map. Return is the second spell that you learn, and it returns you home. Map opens a map, and so on. You learn the spells based on how much experience you have, and you learn enough of them and just going through the page. Although, once high enough level, the ones you'll mainly use are Return, just for travel back to your base, especially when surrounded, Break, which smashes a wall in front of you, and then the two offensive skills, which allow you to kick blocks into enemies, killing them instantly, and Freeze, which permanently freezes the enemy in its current location. I do not know what Flash is, though. Based on the effect, I'm assuming it either makes you move really fast or stuns every enemy. Fly can turn you into a bird and let you fly around the area freely, and then finally, save and restore. Yeah, we need to level up to learn how to save in this game. Gaming was wild back in the day. Now, I know it sounds like a lot of crazy talk to just talk about the mechanics of the game like this, but trust me, that's all this game is. There are no NPCs, there are no cutscenes, no text, no lore entries, there is nothing at all here other than kill enemies, collect items until you're strong enough, and then kill the boss. It is a very simple game, but it's deceptively so. Some enemies will come out here with 6 million health points and with extremely high defense, so you will need to deal a ridiculous amount of damage just to be able to do anything. But due to the ghosts stealing all your items and hiding them from you, even if you get lucky and find a bunch of chests and power-ups, you could get unlucky and have the ghosts just take things from you and scatter them. Even more unlucky, as you collect the items, there'll be less and less items for the ghosts to steal, meaning that the ghosts have a higher chance at stealing those and just end up ruining your time. I've had to freeze enemies due to not dealing enough damage and then just leaving them frozen for hours because I just don't have the strength to kill them. And of course, there are even stronger enemies again past those, and eventually I grinded to the point that I felt was decent and made my way to the boss, which was a 3-headed dragon. Now, the boss doesn't move, luckily, but he can flip you away with his tail, which I actually kind of find funny. If you attack any of the heads, you will see that not only do the heads have unique stats, but they also breathe fire, which chars your character, leaving them looking kind of burnt and funky looking. They deal very decent damage, so I had to once again head out to grind some more until every enemy I met had such high defense and health, I could not reasonably fight them. And then I went back to the heads again. Finally, at the end of everything, I felt as if I dealt enough damage and set off to end my quest once and for all. I went up to the dragon itself and noticed I only dealt damage to one of the heads. The one head dealt far more damage than the other two, but it was still within a reasonable amount of EXP for me to attack it. I came in, got a few hits in, and went back to heal, then returned to the boss room, attacked, went back to heal, and did that a few times until finally I was able to defeat a head. The other two heads were unfortunately completely unaffected by this, and to make matters worse, my house is gone. Apparently, after defeating one of the heads, your house resets back to the beginning of the game, and even worse for you, it begins to spawn monsters constantly. Faster than you can kill them, even. You can kill an enemy occupying the same tile as your house, and then before you even get the chance to step on your house, another enemy will spawn in and take the spot over. At this point, I had completely clocked out of the game, because not only was it getting harder and harder to gain strength, but this is just the first stage of the game. Yeah, all of this endless grind was just the first stage. At the end of this stage, you start the entire process over again, but in a new dungeon. I genuinely believe I must have done something wrong and locked myself out of the endgame, because something here just didn't make sense. I figured I must have gotten hit too many times because there were some enemies that can sap stuff from you. I figured like, oh, some of these enemies can sap my strength. Maybe I let myself get hit by those guys too many times and put myself in an unwinnable state. But like, why would you have enemies that can sap your strength? And again, where you need to grind for strength and can't grind for strength. You need to collect items to gain strength. So if my strength gets sapped and I don't have the items to return it, what then? Do I just give up? It's not even like you can just reload a save either, since saving is the last spell you learn. And I'm sure nowadays we have save states, but gamers back then didn't have that ability. It felt like a fundamental flaw in the game design that goes beyond fixing, because even if you had items respawn after they sap it from you, due to the ghost stealing things, you likely wouldn't find it again anytime soon. I was just completely done with the game and could not justify playing it again, because how anyone could actually spend time playing this in the modern day was just beyond me. But what about the other versions of the game? The game had been ported to multiple platforms throughout the years, but for the purpose of this video, I'll be talking about the Game Boy and Sega Saturn versions. The Game Boy version is bad. It's just a worse version of the same game. Everything moves extremely slow, and I'm not a fan of the monster redesigns, although I do like the skeletons having these little weird eyes. Your stats also aren't on screen unless you're currently doing something, which to me feels like an issue. You can rest in intent though, probably to account for the portable nature of the Game Boy. The Sega Saturn version of the game though, I can speak far more fondly of as a port. It was released as part of the Falcom Classics collection, along with its sequel, Xanadu, which by the way, was just officially released in America for the first time, and the original Ys. The version included in the collection lets you pick between a Saturn version or an original version, although graphically both are the same. The only difference is in the HUD. Overall, the graphics are a significant improvement from the original, although that's to be expected after a 13-year difference in technology. The game isn't really too different otherwise, even most of the enemies are just updated versions of their original designs. You can't use magic from the menu anymore either, instead you have to equip it to either the A or B button and then use it from there. The biggest thing is that I've noticed I got significantly more powerful than the original, far quicker than in the original. And I think I know why. Now obviously I already know how to play, but also notice that the enemies that drain your MP don't just take away one per hit. They don't just take away a couple per hit. They take away all your MP per hit. You can have 60 magic vials and get hit once, and now you have none. The Shinigami that block your magic use in this game get represented by these little floating skulls. They also do not vanish when touching crosses. Furthering this even more, the strength draining enemies work the same way as the MP draining enemies. They no longer just drain a little bit of strength, but instead drain you back down to what I'm assuming was the starting level. So while I was able to get overpowered very quickly, with the game handing me more magic flasks and strength crystals, I feel like this was probably intentional. I think these items might be on some sort of respawn timer, or the like, but I could be wrong. Even outside of the combat, I found more keys allowing me to open the chest quicker and find even more items, rather than just be trapped searching for a key every time I need it. Oh yeah, and the most important part, saving. It's now no longer a magic spell. Yeah, saving is just saving now, and is available from the beginning. So, despite all the enemies being incredibly more difficult than the original, it's a much more user-friendly experience. And like I said, I feel like that's intentional. You know? It feels like the extra damage is even working in the game's favor, because all that extra MP actually has a use now. You'll be trying to flash or freeze enemies like these little green monkeys so you can actually damage them without actually losing everything. And yeah, the flash spell is a stun, not a super speed. You know, whatever. The more you know. I actually had motivation to try and beat stage 1 in this version, although I still wouldn't say the game is good by any means. It's still very basic to an extreme degree, but it doesn't feel like the game design was inherently flawed like it was with the original. I could be wrong, but like I stated, it felt like the game had the items on respawn because it never really felt like I was wandering around for an hour looking like I was in the original. In fact, it didn't take me hours at all. I was able to catch up to my progress on the original in slightly over an hour. If the items are on respawn, then that fixes an inherent issue with the original. And even if they aren't, having save features available from the original and having access to a wider selection of spells far quicker than the original all combine into an experience that I didn't dread. I beat the dragon and moved on to stage 2, where I promptly quit and never looked back. I do not care enough about the game, in either original or remastered form, to actually progress. I do think that if you want to play this game, play the Saturn version, but it's overall not something I would recommend. It's tedious, slow, and an annoying grind at worst, and at best, it's just a mindless dungeon crawl. Some simple additions like being able to stockpile the strength crystals like you can the coins, or giving you a passive increase to strength as you gain experience, would have gone a long way here. I'm not going to try and act like you can't see why the game got big, especially for its time. There just weren't that many games doing stuff like this, and I have huge respect for these older games that were willing to take risks just because it means as technology improved and as they had the time to iron out these kinks, their sequels, or other games inspired by them, ended up doing even better. Dragon Slayer may not be a good game by any means, but I can see some building blocks there that could be used in, say, a sequel, possible Xanadu review coming eventually, or another franchise taking inspiration from it to build on and become something that we can look back on fondly. If you liked this video, please feel free to like and subscribe for more. I also gladly take suggestions for older games like this, if there are any you're specifically looking out for. They don't need to be on a specific system, but I do kindly ask for them to have either an official English translation or a fan translation if possible. I do know a little Japanese, but not nearly enough to play through an entire RPG or visual novel. Dragon Quest III review coming out next year, late January, but after that, no idea where to go next. New year, new me. And the new me wants to take this seriously. So please, lend me your support, and I will see you all on the next one.